Good evening, everyone. System Chalk here, and I am feeling rather embarrassed that I did not read the legacy for this one. So we are going to be playing as the bright young thing, endowed from birth with wealth and talent. A life of ease, comfort, and delight stretches ahead like an amber carpet. We begin with this and that and health, and we're going to talk for the first little bit about what the bright young thing is as a legacy, where it fits in the overall picture for Cultist Simulator, and then we will begin the run itself. So we'll start the new game. I miss the dawn. I generally do. There'll be plenty more. So already gives us a bit of an indication in terms of the type of person that we're dealing with. This is the story of David Ellison. Now, I didn't really think about how I'm going to lay out my verbs, so let's just start by setting it off to the side. We've got this and that and our health. So, what do we start off with the bright young thing? One dabbles with writing and one dabbles with painting, but one lives, above all, in the certainty of one's allowance. So, sheer good fortune, how lucky I have been, and job, an arrangement to exchange one's life for money. And then we have health. This is my body. There are other bodies, but this one is mind, and my mind needs it as a fungus needs soil. Brain or heart or hand or eye. Most of us are born with most of them. And this has the aspect heart. The heart relentless beats to protect the skin of the world we understand. This is also an ingredient, fuel, ointment, pigment, patience. All are consumed in time. Now, in terms of the overall kind of structure of Cultist Simulator and how the legacies work, everybody starts as the aspirant. And that's, I think, a great way to start. I also think that the aspirant probably gets to, at least to me, sort of what the real core of Cultist Simulator is, although I think it's also true that there is excuse me, there is so much that can be said about how, well, I mean, we were talking about the Locksmith stream, actually, so if you think about it, you could just start with the aspirant, and I would argue that the aspirant on its own is enough to sustain a full game. But there is enough in terms of this framework and enough in terms of the way that the game sort of works and the stories that you can tell in it, that there's room for other legacies and there's room for other perspectives sort of built around it. And while for some of the legacies you will wind up taking the same paths, I think something that about the initial circumstances tells you some, it tells you some interesting things about that character, and it gives you maybe a few different perspectives on some of the themes. And I actually like that a lot about the game. I don't know how intentional it is, but there is something sort of interesting about how we can go from the aspirant to the bright young thing. We may even achieve the exact same goal, but the starting circumstances lead to very different sets of challenges and can, lead to some interesting stories. I'll try and unpack what I mean by that a little bit as we go on. But it's what I'll maybe say for the start is that the most common experience for players, it seems, and you can sort of verify this by looking at the Steam achievements, is that you start off with a game of Cultist Simulator, you are utterly confused as the aspirant, and you either starve to death or you run into some kind of money trouble, basically, which does you in, whether it's directly through starvation or something that sort of hit you because of the starvation. Generally, money is a problem, as indeed is the problem for many people who follow the line of the aspirant in real life. And so the next legacy that it gives you is the bright young thing. Somebody who, from the description of the two cards here, somebody who is obviously, well, as it says, very lucky, but somebody who does not necessarily want for money. Now, we don't have any money on the table, but it's pretty clear that we're assured in one's allowance. And this is a very different way of looking at the world than the aspirant, right? The aspirant, you're working as a hospital porter, you lose your job, and this may be an opportunity, but you still need to keep food on the table. And that's not easy to do. In this case, we have sort of the opposite problem. Whether it's through our upbringing, we're the sort of person who maybe, sleeps in late. We don't necessarily engage very deeply with the sorts of interests that we're carrying on with. And you can see that there's really not that much to this person. With the aspirant, when we lose our job, we gain reason. Or was it reason? I think it was passion, actually. In any case, you can sort of see, in terms of the natural endowments of the characters, despite the fact that the bright young thing is very wealthy, they don't really have a lot to them. They have a body, and they have their their inheritance. Well, I guess we don't get the inheritance yet, but we have the good fortune that we've been born into. But one of the challenges that the bright young thing faces, which is different from the aspirant, is that we don't necessarily have a gateway to the mansis. We don't have any kind of idea or ambition or any sort of direction towards the world of dream, whereas the aspirant does. The aspirant has a little bit more of a clear path. And I think there's two things that happen with that, which is, number one, we are hopefully taking some of the lessons that we learn from the aspirant and apply them towards the bright young thing. So the bright young thing sort of removes that financial constraint, at least until we're ready to sort of bring that back into the equation. But it also allows, and in this case, this means that we get to explore some other things, but it also sort of forces us to apply some of the lessons that we learned through our aspirant playthrough. So the usual path in sort of my view is that people do aspirant, bright young thing, physician. Physician may be the first time that they win. And usually among those three, people are sort of like, by that time, usually if you played 3 games, you've kind of decided that you're into Cultist Simulator. And around that time, you're sort of like, okay, maybe I don't exactly know everything that's going on here, but I feel like I know the game. And again, this is why I always feel a little bad when people say that the game doesn't have a tutorial. And they're right. I mean, Weather Factory, of all people, say that the game doesn't have a tutorial. And yet the game doesn't just completely throw you to the wolves. It lets you... It gives you a way of engaging with it and learning things in chunks. And the idea here is that you're going to take that knowledge from different playthrough to playthrough with you. But I also find something kind of interesting in the fact that the wealthy individual maybe doesn't quite have that insight or that ambition. And I always find that kind of neat, because there's the one argument that I've sometimes heard a couple playwrights make about the question of Shakespeare's authorship. And, somebody's like, oh, a commenter couldn't produce such complicated and beautiful works. And they're usually, it's like, yes, because poor people know nothing of what living in the real world is like. And just sort of this idea. I'm not crazy about that, because obviously there's a lot of very wealthy and clearly there are people who have been in the upper strata of society who have produced very significant and important works. I mean, it's not exactly slaves in Greece who are writing the works that have been passed down to us. But it's a fair point, right? That certainly there is something to be said for people who have experienced things that will, produce things that are worthwhile. And so that's not always necessarily a function of wealth. Although it is also fair to say one of the very frustrating things about particularly modern wealth is that there is still a meritocratic argument. So you can afford tutors for your kids. If you're very, very wealthy, you can afford tutors for your kids. You can afford, the leisure to do things, or, even the time to go and have bigger experiences. So, if you're trying to get into a very prestigious university and you're asked to write about, this might actually be something that's mentioned in the History Boys, now that I think of it, that you're asked to sort of write about art, and, you have been flown out to the galleries where you see the original works, versus someone who doesn't have that opportunity to kind of go out and see the original works in person. It's not necessarily that we're consciously trying to select for people who are, who have that particular background, that particular upbringing. but it still produces the same effect. Not that I'm trying to make this, I realize there are strong opinions on those lines, but it is one of the things that I find kind of frustrating, which is that traditionally we sort of think of the slobbering Dauphin who, it's like, well, obviously they shouldn't be there. But the thornier dilemma is you can actually see how a meritocratic system can still produce the kinds of outcomes that people are worried about, because they're very, very capable, but they're capable because of the great fortune that they've had before. So it's a neat one, right? I mention this just simply because whatever perspective we hold on this, at least as far as this character is concerned, they have not necessarily made the most of their position. We have our health, we have our good fortune, and that's it. And this is where the Bright Young Thing legacy becomes really interesting. The first steps are trying to figure out who the hell you are. What is your ambition? Is this game basically going to be going to the work verb time and time again and seeing, seeing what happens until you get bored? Obviously not. But what changes in this person's life to make them more than what they are? A golden day of occasional work. Possibly I'll get something done today. It's all going swimmingly, although Papa's health is not improving. So we've now unlocked Explore. I'm leaving so much space at the top here, but a world of possibilities. Some ripping sorts are introducing me to some ripping sorts of places. Perhaps I'll get something done today. So I might as well do the golden day of occasional work while we're waiting for Explore to work out. If I ever have trouble deciding how to spend my money, the good people at these spots can certainly be of assistance. So, we've got the Ecdysis Club and Oriflamme's Auction House. So in both of these cases, again, we can compare this to the Aspirant. So in the case of the Aspirant, we discover these by exploring ourselves. So this is actually kind of the interesting one, right? You can almost see, I like thinking of Barry Lyndon in this case. You can have this sort of Barry Lyndon experience as the Aspirant where you are very good at talking with people and engaging. Not that Barry doesn't do things, but it sort of feels like in this case, it is his ability to interact and meet and engage with the right sort of people that gets him sort of where he needs or wants to be. And so in this case here, with the Aspirant, if you get a follower early on, so in that case, this is where the analogy breaks down, right? Because Barry doesn't make a cult of anything other than really Barry. But in the case of the Aspirant, whether you make that effort to sort of build your network, to engage with other people and find common cause, and those people sort of then being willing to kind of go out and do things for you and find things that may help you on your way. In the case of the Bright Young Thing, they have money and they know the right sorts of people. My friends are the best friends. Sorry, I'm going to stop quoting Barry Lyndon now. Barry Lyndon the book, and I'm quoting the movie in that case. In this case here, it's largely our position and the fact that we have money that have sort of assured us that we are going to be able to engage with the Ecdysis Club and Oriflamme's Auction House. So, Ecdysis Club, a cabaret with an occult reputation. This has Aspect Moth. I knew a man who captured moths in a bell jar. On nights like this, he would release them one by one to die in the candle. It's a location. Locations. Everything must be somewhere, and this is here. It also has the aspect of Heart. The heart relentless beats to protect the skin of the world we understand. And finally, Grail. Hunger, lust, the drowning waters. The principle of the Grail honors both the birth and the feast. And then we have Oriflammes. Oriflammes specializes in curios, perfumes, taxidermy, specimens, and rare texts. It operates from a cramped new premises now since the destruction of the old by an unexplained fire. So, and we were talking about the Locksmith's Dream before. Oriflammes is in fact one of the sponsors for the location. We perch on alarming Rietveld chairs in a windowless auction room with vividly burnt orange walls, waiting for the auctioneer to announce what he's offering. The reek of new paint makes the brain spin. The other way, if you want to... Sorry, what am I doing? I'm not ready to bid yet. The other way that you can sort of think about it is, if you think of the TV series Succession, you can almost see here that David Ellison here is not necessarily... the occultist who has tried to put together whatever money they can in order to be able to buy this incredible source of knowledge. In this case, I might be Connor buying a particular Napoleon curio for a very large amount of money. So, again, these are the fun things where you don't have to think of it this way inside of the game, but it is kind of neat to sort of imagine what type of character you are and what might be driving you. In this case here, I just have a lot of money to burn a hole in my pocket. Why, why take the time... Like, why do something that any ordinary person can do when instead you've got a group of sort of, I don't know, people who are mad, bad, and dangerous to know, and they're going to let you know, the secret place. Like, to give you an example of the Locksmith's Dream, imagine there was something in, as an event. Like, it'd be impossible to do this, but, like, the Ecdysis Club were to be set up as part of the Locksmith's Dream project. And what you would do is there would be a secret place somewhere in a city, and you would have to say a password to get in there. And when you get in, all the other people there are people who are familiar with the secret histories, and it's a special club only for people who have, who have been able to find their way there. Maybe it's part of the Enigmas or something along those lines. That's kind of... There's something really special about that, right? That you're able to, or that you could possibly see, or like, this would be something a little bit like the experience of the Bright Young Thing. The aspirant finds it because they've built this network of people who are knowledgeable, whereas in the case of the Bright Young Thing, there's someone who, maybe they're a mark. They're going to be sort of financing these activities that maybe they're not necessarily going to amount to much, but their money is still good there, and they're basically going to be the sort of person who can help pay the rent. I've noticed that more I mention that I like Neil Stephenson, the more people I run into are like, I don't really care for him. But I do really like the Baroque cycle, and there's an interesting contrast between Daniel Waterhouse, who's one of the main characters, Isaac Newton, who's his roommate for a large part of it. And there's this jealousy that Daniel winds up feeling in terms of the relationship to Isaac, because Newton, both historically and in the book, is interested in alchemy. And there is this noble that is sort of pursuing Isaac and is trying to, he's trying to get in good with him, and he's becoming an alchemist. And he's someone who, he'll buy all of the material that he needs and he'll fund Newton's work. He himself is not ever going to amount to anything as far as an academic or an alchemist. But there is that jealousy that Daniel will feel because in this case, there is something that he's going to be able to satisfy in Isaac Newton that he can't. Daniel's not an alchemist, not interested in alchemy, and he certainly doesn't have the money to be able to fund that sort of research. So that's another angle that you can sort of see here, which is right now I'm a bit of a poser, a dilettante to, I'm going to Oriflammes, I'm buying up objects in Oriflammes, and Oriflammes is happy for the beer money, but they're, whether or not I'm going to make anything of the things that I buy there is another matter. A crowd of pinched faces, glinting eyes, who will bid? So we have the option for the Orchid Transfigurations, Volume 1, a 16th century alchemical fever dream attributed to Robert Flood, frequently banned for the disturbing allure of its illustrations. This is in the original Latin. I've raised my hand. The auctioneer raps out an acknowledgement. Will anyone match me? All is going swimmingly, although Papa's health is still not improving. Time, the sundial's shadow passes. I must have funds to live, or I will become ill. So again, 3 funds every time we do one of those, so possibly I'll get something done today. It is also worth mentioning, so I've talked a little bit about who this character is as a person. I've talked a little bit about the circumstances that lead you to making certain choices inside of this game, but there is one other angle to think about, which is that, again, whether this is our failure to consider other possibilities, our upbringing has closed off the potential to, to work to other places, or, we've never considered them, or we just don't feel the need to do so. Think of what funds, health, Ecdysis Club, and Oriflammes get you. I don't believe you can do work at the Ecdysis Club or Oriflammes without, one of them I believe you would need another item to be able to do that. So our 2 options right now are this and that, essentially live off of our allowance, or to do physical labor with our health. And why would we do that? It pays worse and it potentially leads to injury. So it's also fair to say that, and again, I think this is very interesting when you consider what at least I think Cultist Simulator is about. This upbringing is an inherently limiting one. Where we have no conception of what we potentially could otherwise be. In the case of the aspirant, it's not necessarily an easy life, but it is a life of considerably more potential than the bright young thing has. Because it's not just simply the fact that so us as a player, we know there is a bigger and more interesting world out there. But as a character, we have no access to it. For those of you that have seen the network article that I do that sort of maps out all of the relationships, we do not have any way of really connecting into the special world. The closest we can get is getting some items from Oriflammes. But even then, getting the items from Oriflammes is not necessarily going to help us if we can't read them or if we can't do anything else with them. So that's another thing that I sort of find interesting about the Bright Young Thing legacy is that, whether you say this character just simply does not have a conception of a life other than like waking up at 1 PM and, going to the auction house or the Ecdysis Club, or, they, maybe they were interested. I mean, again, there's different ways you can imagine your bright young thing. It might be that they're actually quite a capable individual. Maybe they're working very hard. Maybe they do like to sometimes slum it and do some construction work or something like that. It's your character. You can do it however you want. But it's it could also be that you may have these ambitions and just simply no real way of realizing them. Again, the friends that you're making inside the occult world are ones who see you as an opportunity to pay their rent, rather than necessarily people who will help you along the way. There's a few different entryways to that, and it's kind of up to you to decide what's the most interesting to you. So someone else has matched my bid. I must match it with more funds or forgo my prize. It's clearly a ringer from Oriflammes. I've raised my hand. The auctioneer raps out an acknowledgement. Will anyone match me? All is going swimmingly, although Papa's health is still not improving. Possibly I'll get something done today. I've won the auction. The auctioneer makes a note of my name and signals one of the attendants. I have my prize. I hope it's worth it. So for us, it's currently not, because we don't have Latin, although what I am going to do is search the city with my health now. Crowded thoroughfares by day, a fog-wrapped labyrinth by night. I'll walk the streets seeking secrets until I can walk no more. This is something that's actually true for me. Particularly when I sort of established myself in Vancouver, walking is free, and so it's very easy to... It's a very easy one to it's very easy to for me, it was very easy to kind of go around with a book and and spend my time that way. I might have found somewhere unusual. All right, happy to get Moorlands. Moorlands is not as exciting as the auction house or the Ecdysis Club, but it doesn't cost as much money. I'm actually kind of tempted to keep going to Moorlands for the next little while, so we'll still do this and that. Possibly I'll get something done today. Moorlands, the dim premises of Miss Moorland, who deals in rare and sometimes dangerous books. It takes time to sort the gold from the dross, the wheat from the chaff, the blood from the water. If I buy enough books, I will find something interesting. We have a season of Ardors coming up, so we are all of us, both ape and angel, so don't have a partner yet, but we'll at least get some contentment. Possibly I'll get something done today. Cloud on the horizon. All right. Ghastly news. Papa is dead. No one will tell me exactly how, but the estate is an estate. My allowance is tied up in probate and so forth. One can only hope it's resolved before the bills come due. All right. A change in circumstance. So you can almost imagine here, right, in terms of this story, how it works out. We, instead of going to our usual haunts, Papa's died, and I wasn't, people were trying to tell me about the news. People were trying to give me, give me the heads up, give me the warning, let me know about what had happened. And instead, I went away from my usual haunts. I went to check out a new place, Moorland's shop, and when I come back, I learn about the news. Of course, the other way that you can think about this is that this also indicates something promising about this character, which is that they're not necessarily going to stay inside of their ruts, that they are actually seeking out these books. They are picking up books. They're deciding to do these kinds of things freely. And perhaps this is indicating some promise and maybe a direction that they might follow later on. The 6 letters on necessity, warnings and confessions about the cost of the invisible arts, addressed to a student by the 17th century magus and reputed immortal, Julian Cosley. Now, this is a little early for me to wrap up, but I actually think this is not a bad place for me to sort of end the story here, so I will thank you very much for watching. I should maybe mention, just because this may not be clear from the introduction, or it's also possible that people like to skip the introduction and just move on to the opening moves for the broadcast. There are going to be a few other videos that I need to post, and what I may do, just because I only have so much bandwidth, and I've actually kind of exhausted all of my VOD and all of my stream content for a little while. If I have to post something that is either Cultist Simulator related or otherwise related to some of these other activities, what it might do is it may wind up bumping the episode. And one of the nice side effects of that is it's going to give me a little bit of a buffer to make sure that I'm able to kind of record things and get them ready on time. So the plan will still be that there will be something related to the Secret History setting every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that it is an episode like this. But if it is something that is time sensitive, if it's something that relates to the setting and I think it's worth posting up, the one thing I may wind up doing is just sort of moving the episode. So let's say that happens. The next episode will be coming up Wednesday. Let's say Wednesday there's something that comes out about the Locksmith's Dream and it's something that I want to cover. In that case, what would happen is episode 2 would wind up being moved to Thursday and going on. I'll try to minimize that as much as possible, and I'm certainly hoping that whatever winds up taking up that slot will be of equal, if not greater, interest to you. But I can assure you that we will be seeing the story of David Ellison to the very end, no matter where it leads us. Until then, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you Wednesday or thereabouts for the next episode. Take care.